Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable discussion where we're going to talk about the essential topic, which is the financing of transitions. Let me remind you of the quote from Margaret Thatcher: regardless of her political ideas, it could be used by many managers. Don't tell me what to do, I already know what to do. Tell me how. And you could add how much, because that is the question of the multiple transitions that we're dealing with today. They're going to be costly, and we'll come back to the estimates, the assessments. And the world has never had such high debt levels, and we have some both private actors and state. So where do we find the money? Then our saving by raising higher taxes. So we'll ask this question to all of the panel members. William Cadouche-Chassin, who's the president of Urezao, Pierre Padmery, the president of Société Générale, Pierre Jean-Louis Géraudot from Lazare, Delphine Damarizit from Euronext, and Meka Brunel, who's the president of the Palladio Foundation and who has a long career in building at Eiffage. And you know the tradition of these roundtable discussions at the Cercle des Économistes. It's opened by an economist who's the member of the circle, and this morning it's Alain Tranois, who is the member today. Alain is the head of studies at the EHSS and a professor of economics at the Université Aix-Marseille. So the introduction is for you, Alain. Thank you. Firstly, welcome to this session that's devoted to a very small question, which is the financing of transitions in the plural. In the 5 minutes that I have, I'm going to talk about the financing of three types of transition. One, to a new energy model, the demographic transition, and the third one is transition to manage geopolitical risk, so basically financing defense expenses. The big question, if we position ourselves as the state, and this will be complementary to what the private sector representatives here today will say, do we finance through debt or do we finance through taxation? Facing this question, there's major thinking, a major question. Who benefits from the expenditures? Does it benefit the current generation, or does it benefit future generations? And once you've asked and answered that question, once you've asked it, it's easier to answer the question, even if things can be more complicated when you get into the details. For ecological transition, I'd like to remind you of a few facts, and I'll start with this sentence from the great mathematician Henri Poincaré: thought should never be subjected to dogma, to a party, a passion, an interest, to anything other than facts, the facts themselves. And I think that this sentence is something we should be meditating today, all of you, and the people around you in a more general way, and all French people. I'll start with 3 figures about energy transition that are unknown. Since the arrival of Emmanuel Macron in 2017 as president, I looked at how we decreased emissions in France, greenhouse gas emissions. Does anyone know the answer? 19%. In Germany, anyone know the answer? Was it more? 23%. So that means that these two countries have achieved 1/4 or 1/5 of the pathway to decarbonization. That's good. So there are 2 good marks there, but when I look at Italy, they've only decreased by 5%. This means, without an exceptional cost, with the slow progress in the GDP, we still managed to progress and do 1/5 of the path, and we still have 20 years ahead of us for the rest. So I'd like to stay optimistic, as Jean-Hervé Lorenzi was. The financing. This transition to a new energy model will be done once for all human generations. So the benefit is for all of the future generations, not just our children and grandchildren, but all future generations. And in this case, what is the financing vector that seems to be imposed? It's a long-term debt over 30 or 40 years. And since it will benefit all future generations, we could roll it over from generation to generation. And you'll say, well, that's crazy. An economist that proposes that we roll over debt to finance energy transition. But that's exactly what's been perceived as one of the best inventions of economic theory. When you have young people, old people, different generations, you need instruments to pass wealth on, to pass on an asset or a debt, and you either use currency or debt for that. So that's how we could finance the investment, and the total budget for energy transition is 40 billion euros, so between 1 or 2 percentage points of the GDP. There's another consequence of global warming, and that is damage, deterioration. Either they can be insured because they're diversified. If there are deterioration and damages on one coast, and only there, they can be financed by the insurance companies, or there's non-insurable risk that has to be managed by the state. This concerns current generations, so we need to finance this through taxation. Let's look at demographic transition. There are 2 consequences. An increase in health expenditures, basically 1 point of GDP, 25 billion euros, and it also causes problems for our current retirement system. Look at the case of Italy. I'm focusing on Italy here today. I hope there aren't many Italians in the room, but when you look at the pyramid of age in Italy, it's almost like a balloon. 400,000, the current generation of contributors, and in the 20 years ago, there were retired people, 600,000. So how can a distribution system for retirement hold in this situation? So the only way to correct this is to introduce a capitalization retirement system. And I hope that the debate that we have today will look at this. Regardless of the result of the elections, the financing of our retirement will come back to the table. Either we use capitalization for the retirement, 15 to 20%, because current generations, 670,000 people. So we have a gap of 15 to 20% right now in terms of financing for health expenditures. It's the current generations who are benefiting from these health expenditures due to increasing life. So we need to finance this through taxes. The third pitfall, where we go from a peaceful economy to an economy where we're risking war, which generations are going to benefit from expenditures? It's the current generation, so we need to finance this through taxes. So to finance debt, to finance the increase in health, and to finance certain macroeconomic environmental damage, we need to do this through taxation, plus a system of capitalization and a long government loan that would roll at a European level to finance the ecological transition. Thank you, Alain. So let's look at this. William Cadouche-Chassin, you're the president of Eurozero. Can you tell us how you look at the financing needs for all of these transitions, ecology, digital, geopolitical, and what share should the private sector pay and what part the public sector? Hello? I don't have an estimate. I base myself on the estimates done by specialists. There's the report from the state, from Draghi, Pizzetti-Mafuz, IMF. So we can see how much this transition can cost. I'd add digital transition to geopolitical and demographic transition also. If you look at the assessments, we see astronomical figures for Europe. We have 500 billion per year until 2030 minimum on the ecological side, 120 to 150 for the digital transition, and to improve the digital level of Europe. Military, 1% of European GDP, roughly 200 billion. And so we're looking at total figures between 800 and 1,000 billion per year. And you look with the commitments made by the public aggregated at the level of Europe with an investment program of 500 billion on ecological transition between 2021 and 2027, so the gap is huge. So this can't work unless we use taxes and unless we start to use current savings. So Europe has more than 30 billion euros available. The other piece of good news is that Europe produces a surplus of savings each year, 300 to 400 billion. Why is this only partly good news? Because a surplus of savings leads to a deficit in training of the stock of fixed capital in Europe. There are 2 points of GDP in difference between Europe and the U.S. When we talk about the gap between the U.S. and Europe, we have a cumulative gap of our creation of fixed capital. So this savings are badly used, and it's badly used because there are 300 billion of savings in Europe that will be invested in economies outside of Europe and in particularly in the U.S. So we have to see how we're mobilizing these savings. And there's a topic of preference for markets that are considered to be more dynamic. So this leads me to a qualitative point and not just quantitative. Our ability to create projects, to have actors who innovate, who know how to structure transition projects, is as important as the ability to finance them. So there are things that work, and I'll finish with that. We have a fabric of companies that's very dense in Europe, 55,000 of small and medium sizes, 90% of the economic basis in Europe, and there are actors that use savings to finance these companies. We see that in the financing of ecosystems, one of the main topics in France is Europe is financing technological innovation, so that represents 25% of the global use of savings. So for venture capital, it's 8%. But there are things that are moving forward with the collaboration of the public and private sector. The Scale Up Europe ecosystem that represents 4 billion in deployment by the European Fund and with other sovereign funds in Europe, including the BPI associated with Caisse de Dépôt, Cofidis in Spain. and an organization in Germany, this starts to densify the private actors that we can use to boost the use of these savings. So they got rid of the background music. Anyway, so Jean-Louis Giraudoux, Jean-Louis said debt, taxes. William said we'll use private savings. But the financing of these multiple transitions, will it be as difficult as it seems? It's actually mind-boggling when you think about the ability of a country, a continent, humanity in general to finance all of the transitions that are required. It's really mind-boggling, as was illustrated by our first two speakers. Why? Because they're transitions that will lead to a huge taxation on all of the actors. These are going to be very expensive transitions. We talked about demographic transition through the retirement systems and health, 1% of GDP. So we need to adjust the retirement systems, energy transition. We remember the 2.3% of GDP that was in the report, the IMF report that says we're going to add 10 to 20% of debt on our debt to our total debt ratio if we don't have a carbon tax, and if there's a carbon, and 40 to 50 if we don't have the carbon tax. So if we look at our security and resilience, 22% of GDP for NATO expenses in some countries aren't there. All expenses that companies will do for onshoring, reshoring, working on the value chain to improve resilience. And so this financing is due to this amplified transition. The more we build without building smart cities, the more we have energy expenditures, energy transition, and security. We know there's a conflict for resources, for water, for rare earth, for certain minerals. So same thing with security and for immigration and the countries of the South, there's a real problem there. So all of these expenses for transition are essentially non-productive. Health doesn't produce any wealth. It has positive externalities. It has a certain level of morality. It's necessary, but it doesn't produce any wealth. Energy transition, as opposed to current ideas, won't produce a lot of wealth in and of itself. It's just a substitute, an obsolete system with another capital stock, a new one that will produce the same thing and in a more expensive way because the energies we use are going to be less dense and less efficient. Similarly, for defense and resiliency, undoing a supply chain to put it somewhere else can cost more and it doesn't produce any wealth. So we're not producing any wealth when we use weapons. It destroys it. And nevertheless, but we don't have a choice, Jean-Louis. Of course, that's my point. We don't have a choice. And we're doing it in a context where we need to consolidate our public finances in Europe. So how do we do this? There'll be a mix of solutions, of course. To distribute resources, we need to produce them. And the first requirement is to not dismantle, to not remove incentives for production and growth. It's more than ever necessary to produce wealth because we have to reassign them to non-productive activities but that are absolutely necessary for humanity. So production, productivity, education, everything that will make sure that our economies produce more. Savings is a result of this, and we need to reassign it. Delphine will certainly talk about this. With the single capital market, we know all these debates, but we have to go through this base. And if we want to be able to borrow, we need savings. We need to create this by maintaining the stimulation of our economy, and if we don't, we'll have more authoritarian solutions, financial repression like in the after-war with forced assignment of capital, higher taxes, and I don't think we can only focus on the fiscal aspects because it's not equitable. So we're going to become poorer because they're massive non-productive investments. We have to do this as quickly as possible to finance all of these transitions without giving up, and we're not going to escape from having more taxation on our savings. And we can't be in denial about the need to work on our retirement, the need to find new and alternative energies, or to deny that we need to improve our security and defense in Europe. Thank you. So if you read between the lines, you're also looking at innovation. And so Pierre Palmieri from Société Générale, the key question is, if we focus more on the objective, how are we going to finance all of these investments with the production of new technologies that sometimes we find difficult to assess in terms of their yield, their efficiency. So how do you as a banker imagine the financing of all of these innovations? So, hello everyone. Let's start with good news that was underscored by William. There's a lot of savings in many regions of the world, starting with Europe. So the question is, how can we redeploy these liquidities, the available liquidities, on the financing of transition? And there's something that we don't talk about enough, and how do we distribute risks? Who are the right actors to take on certain levels of risk in the optimum way? I'll come back to this. For an industrial, for a financial company, the complexity is that technologies are new, sometimes they're not proved, there are new ecosystems, there are new business models. So we need to give as much visibility as possible where we can. This requires a certain number of things: visibility on public policy, visibility on industrial policy, on energy policy in Europe, also on regulations. They have to be as stable as possible, on fiscal policy, on tariff policy to support public action. That's the first point. The second thing is we need to shift ecosystems at the same time. If I look at hydrogen, for the hydrogen market to develop, we need producers have possibilities of selling their energy, and that the distributors ensure that there will be distribution over time, that they have the proper logistics, and will be producing renewable energy to make green energy, that incentives will stay on these energies, and we'll have the way of financing them. So all of the players have to work together in a coordinated way to shift the ecosystem in a coherent manner. So when we bring together all of these actors, we need to do so to better understand the risk. Now, if we look at the sharing of risk, given the pressure on the budgets of the states and different local authorities, regional authorities, I think that the challenge for each public euro spent, how do we maximize the raising of private funds? So we have to think of as a driving effect on a given topic. If I think of renewable energies, in my opinion, it was a success. Who should be responsible for long-term financing? Who should be taking on the long-term risk? With respect to the short-term, it's the public for the long-term risk and the private for short and medium term. And who should be taking on the industrial risk? To what extent can financial backers accept to take on industrial risks? So this very granular interpretation and reading of the of the projects will allow us to maximize the use of public funds. And innovation, lastly. There's a huge challenge, especially in Europe. How do we finance innovation and entrepreneurship when many of the solutions will come from emerging leaders, from entrepreneurs who are going to come with solutions? I think of green tech, for example. In a Europe that doesn't have enough venture capital compared to the Americans, and I think this requires incentive policies that are stable over time. Pierre, the role of the bank in this process. Is the financing of innovation the role of a bank? We tend to say the other fundamental dimension will be scaling up, and is it on this dimension that the banks have a role to play? I think that banks can participate in the financing of emerging leaders. This is what we try to do. We created a fund of €1 billion to finance the new actors of the future. And this is something that we do for these new transition projects. But you're right. What's essential for banks is the scaling up. Reallocation of capital. Our exposure on renewables goes beyond our exposure on the oil stream, the downstream of oil. So we need to reallocate capital. We need to support our customers, thinking about sector by sector, steel, aluminum, maritime transport. We need to think about their issues in order to support them, to understand the risks, and to build pathways that are realistic given their own constraints. What we try to do is not to finance less aluminum. We want to finance more aluminum, but for each ton of aluminum produced, the emissions per ton of aluminum go down over time. So this is what we're doing in a concerted way with our clients. This is where we can play a role, and I'm less pessimistic than others on the ability to finance these transitions. Go ahead. Yes, you can applaud him, of course. William talked about the huge amounts of savings available in France. Okay, I've understood that using savings is important. For expert savings, there's no topic, but we see that the savings in a mattress is significant in France. So, Meka Brunel, how can we mobilize these savings, non-expert savings? How do we attract the basic person who's saving? How do we articulate public and private so that the French person who's put money away has enough trust to go and invest in all of these transitions?
Well, good morning. I don't know if I've got the answer to all that. Let me share some reflection. When we come to good news, the emissions in France have gone down by 19%. So, in the Palladio Foundation, we published a barometer for the concerning impacts. Every year we looked what was the economic aspect, and we looked at society and environment, and we thought in our sector in France the impact of greenhouse gases dropped by 22%. It's not enough, but it does show a mobilization of a whole sector, a whole branch, and it encourages us to go further. When we talk about making use of savings, first, one thing. Over the last few years, since, after the last World War, globalization, everything, we have been spending on a short-term basis, everyone individually, rather than thinking about long-term investment. Today, we really need to encourage investment over a long-term period. You're right, it does not produce wealth immediately, but if we don't do it, it is a problem, so we have to look at it the other way. We need to invest massively in 5 sectors: education, innovations, health, democracy, and the infrastructure to get all this to run smoothly, and of course data and so on. And to do it, first of all, when we, if you create an opposition between public and private saving. Actually, we are all, as taxpayers, shareholders of the public money. We are all stakeholders, and there's no specific difference to make. And I think for a very long time we talked about a debt. For instance, in France, the debt is held by a lot of foreign companies, so we invest a lot abroad, particularly in the United States. And our debt is also held by foreign funds because we don't have retirement pension funds. So this is what finances the pensions. We don't have control over this. After the war, we launched state loans, explaining why we're doing it. And I think it's in the period where we are, we need to better explain rather than explain why we're doing it so that it is visible right next to us, so it's something that is tangible, something that is measurable, and allow us to go ahead. We saw the issue of trying to point savings in a given direction, everything we offer. What could we imagine having something which is simple and convincing, with guaranteeing the capital, for instance? I think all the tools are there. First of all, we have a lot of tools, a lot of rules, and it's fine to have rules to protect capital. That's inventing more. The toolbox is already full, so we have to be sober. And let's look how we can make best use with the tools that we already have. They are all there, whether it's circular economy and modalities to it, but let's explain to people what it's for. Let's be simple, make sure that you show the way. When you give money to association, you will explain to people it's going to be a tax alleviation. No, we are pointing our taxes in a given direction. So we could do the same for our savings, our investments, and understanding. But the transitions are very complex and interact with each other. And so we cannot say we're going to do it here or not there, and you have to explain, and it must be an 80-20 because you can't do everything at the same time with the same efficiency. Thank you very much, Mika Brunel. So we have talked about mobilizing savings or making use of people's savings. If it's a place where savings can go and fund projects, it is on the stock market. So Delphine Demarcy, sometimes the stock market really plays a role in funding all these breakthroughs, all these transitions, and also the financial products which will be offered to fund the transitions. How do you see your strategic role for the transitions? Well, I don't think I have all the solutions. Obviously, on the capital markets are a solution to finance risk. There's a lot of underestimating. By allowing the savers and investors to diversify their risks, they can challenge on the growth, challenge and growth of a company. So to talk about energy transition, at Euronext, on 159 clean techs are there, 100 billion capitalization. They have raised 4.5 capital since 2009, and maybe a lot more. More recently, where there have been less coming onto the stock market, onto the stock exchange, the clean techs have been still coming. These are people with large needs for capital and investment, and this is why they can find a potential. And so you need investors to do this. And let me put a specific angle on this logic in terms of saving. You're talking about the challenges of what capital markets represent for the transitions in Europe. When we talk about transition, if we look at the figures given by the European Union, which are mind-boggling, behind that we said, what transition, what do we want? And do we want to follow our European values? And we means we have to give provide a certain way of doing it, which is a bit different from in other geographies. We need to be strategically independent in terms of funding. We're not isolated, of course. The role of Euronext is to get investors from all over the world. And here we're there to provide markets which are big enough and high performance enough to interest everyone. We're stronger if we can offer the European businesses a certainty that they will also find the European capitals. It means domestic goods. It must be, it's not just only domestic, now it's European. And as was said earlier, there are some reports which have been produced and with figures showing the situation in Europe. What I often repeat, it is not. It's needed to get countries close to us. For instance, in the Netherlands, they've had pension funds for a long time. Less today. So these pension funds exist and they invest massively in the United States. Just as a reminder, the pension system is 7% of the GDP and 14%, and considerably higher for the contributors in Holland. So the Netherlands is not a very good large market, and they cannot fill their capacity for funding. They tend to turn to the United States rather than their neighbors. The work that we are putting in, which needs to progress, is to try and initiate the markets so that there is a base of sources of savings. In France, 47% of savings in households, not stabilized, but say that everything funds the economy, but in liquid savings, and it's nothing to do with what you have in the United States. 40% in France, if we look in the whole of Europe. You need both types. You need to point savings in direction of kind of capital equity. It's important to it, and we must have a unified investment base. And the capital market is one of the priorities for the next European legislature. So William Chassin. Okay, unify the capital markets, give this European dimension to be able to move on, but also have all the regulatory aspects. And you said, well, Europe, isn't it a bit too regulatory? I'm aware that a lot of things that we're saying similar to what is happening to politics in Europe, because we say we have to unify the markets and we need a new stage in sovereignty at European level. So it goes against what's happening socially in Europe. There are three dimensions in what the continent can do, and a lot have been mentioned. The first thing is to change paradigms. We have structured the legal corpus, the regulatory one, we were around two notions. There's a non-false confidence, and with the financial crisis, the notion of stabilization. We need to move on to another dimension, which is upscaling. We're hearing this more and more often. Mr. Orban has talked about it when he took his chairmanship. He took all the reports that we've mentioned, are reports which talk about scaling up to competitiveness and making use of equity. If we look at European level, we'll destroy a stock of capital and replace it, in point of fact. And there maybe I don't agree with you, Jean-Louis. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation which will create value and will create clusters of innovation, and we need to fund them. Second point, we have to have equity. We have to get this mobilization of equity. This is not something very usual in Europe. We need a notion saying that the policy of the central bank and the regulations in general need to stimulate the management of equity, not only the monetary issue and stabilization. Something happening for pension funds, things are moving. William, everyone in the audience is not. Say, what do you talk about making use of equity? What do you mean? You have a debt and capital. Simply, when we talk about capital, the capital can be invested in different ways. You have the stock exchange markets, 20% of the economic tissue. When we talk of innovation, we're talking about very small companies in terms of size, a number of companies on the stock exchange which represent the European network, less than 10%. So you have to mobilize to get the capital, and regulations coming in on private saving to invest in not only private equity and innovation. There are things to be done to provide some openness for banks. Let me finish that. We need to change the scale of the actors, players. The banks, markets, asset managers, and private equity funds are very small dwarfs compared with the rest of the world. And to mention what different, we need to have stakeholders who can use and mobilize the savings and make good use of them. Pierre Palmieri, can you tell us if the banks today are ready for these transitions? But there is one point that you wanted to insist on. The transitions beyond the financial aspect need to be socially acceptable. There's a notion of fairness and equity in this. You believe in the multiplication of local transition. So, well, I believe that the transitions to be sustainable need to be responsible, and we must sort of get on board, bring on board all of the populations in these transitions. But maybe three things: first, employment, then equity, and increasing skills and competence. When we talk about employment, I think we have a great opportunity to redeploy our industrial means. I think for sovereignty reasons, for equity reasons, countries and regions in Europe need to roll out again, so we're not dependent on the Chinese or Americans for solar panels, batteries, and so on. This challenge for reindustrialization is a tremendous opportunity to rethink territory development, and do away with landlocking. So if we consider that there are new jobs available, you will get people on board. But then I don't see how we can avoid having different approaches depending on the geography where people live and their purchasing power. And finally, I think there is an increase in skills and competence. For new, I think it's very important. There are new techniques, new challenges in the field of training. And I think by managing to bring together all of the teams and explain what transition is, by providing them with the technical and intellectual tools to allow them to adapt to the new world, I think this will also get people to join us. So we have to prepare people to operate better in the world tomorrow. Let's say a small boss who tomorrow goes to see his banker at the Société Générale will find a new approach, new listening, and a particular sensitivity on the issue. Well, let me give you the example of this equity fund of 1 billion for the new actors in the world of transition. I think the appetite for risk will be different when you feel that they are the major players for the future. Most of the customers in 5 or 10 years are not even there today yet. I think that banks are there to accompany innovation and development. And then our anchoring in territories mean that we need to know what is going on in each territory. We need to understand it closely enough to be able to fund the operators, once again, in partnership with the authorities. I think the role we can also play is to use our network to provide new types of services. For instance, in the energy efficiency, in housing, solar panels for individuals. We have developed partnerships with a number of stakeholders. This is a way to give a new direction to our business model. Thank you, Pierre Palmieri. You said you have to be acceptable from a social point of view. It must be local. Start from local level at least. And Mega Brunel, all this is a daily business for citizens in the city or the type of urbanisms that they are offered. Do you know what it represents? What needs to be provided in terms of efforts to build these sustainable cities, and what will be what are these towns going to be, cities going to be like? 3 minutes. Well, thank you for the question. A couple of comments. We are in an industry which is at the bottom. You need a roof to be able to live and everything. There are basic needs, really at the bottom, the really basics. Unfortunately, we are constantly segmenting this area. We say we need social housing, we need private housing, we need accommodation for seniors, we need trade and so on. But all of this creates a city, and it's a place where you live and where you have an infrastructure and public areas to go from one place to another. 4 figures. 50% of the world population lives in 2% of the surface of the globe, using 75% of the energy and emitting 80% of greenhouse gases. What we do at Palladio Foundation, and this is part of our barometer, so the industry for cities is 10% of GDP, more than 2 million employment and jobs, local jobs, and we need these. We need to go on speeding up and creating innovation by industrializing. When you industrialize, you need housing, you need infrastructure, schools, sports venues, and whatever. You have to look at cities as a globality with collective actions. And this is what we do. We've tried to work with our stakeholders horizontally so we can work at a local level. We do it in 2 ways. For instance, we launched when we had a summit for universities of the future. We talked about thermal surface energy. We're beginning to map what we can create in terms of renewable energies by geothermal means. So if we could get a maximum of our production, we could reduce by 90% of the import of Russian gas. We're doing it also for families and so on. We work with middle-sized towns to allow them speed up their transformation by massification. We're not going to look one day for social housing, once for education, everything, but all together we do kind of reverse speech to go to see the mayors and provide them with a collective solution. And there's definitely a will to do it. Thank you very much. Delphine Damarcet. since we are trying to be concrete, there is something that I really hadn't thought of, and which is really determining. Once again, with the idea of giving a direction to savings in the financing products we are offered. How do we find the indexes which are going to be used for financing? How do we find the best possible use for the savings to create transition? Well, you can channel savings, and for those who have an allowance who do it themselves, so there are a lot of players who follow a massive direction using a number of vectors with having fund benchmarks and so on. And it's a dual responsibility. The standards defined in our world by the Commission on FR and those who produce the products. What is striking is that you can do everything on these issues. The trend that we are seeing, and something that I find of concern, is exclusions. To say, we can say we're going to fund people who are virtuous, moral person, make the best use of their capital and so on, and everything's fine. And the other thing, say, let us go along with transitions and support them and help fund the players who are transforming. And no doubt we need to do both of them. And in the tools that we take part in, the herd indexes which are created to support savings. First thing, we have the system in which we are building indexes which allow us to choose our vectors. At Euronext, we look, for instance, with the CC40, we try to avoid the exclusions and not have any prohibitions in terms of behavior if it doesn't seem non-conventional and doesn't follow international standards. And I wanted to insist on two issues. The first one is at European level, we need to find the right cursor between needing to be dependent on China and say, and be credible. We say you need to invest in transition, sustainable development, and at the same time, we're going to act on a very small part of savings, and find the balance is not easy. But we have to be careful with the taxonomy, not to go wrong. The second example, we have something called TAC SVP 1.5, launched in 2023, which has an objective to bring together all the companies in the USBF 120. We're talking about 120 companies who have joined this contract to commit towards a way to reduce emissions. Every company can contribute from their own work. And we didn't call it CAC 40 because it's talking with a number of companies who were prepared to commit. I thought there were 37 originally. We've got 53 today, and there are some which are not spontaneously seen as entirely green, but they are working on transition. So we've got Euraseo in them, and I'd like to congratulate them. We want to have a positive movement here and make use of savings that way. So to sum up, Jean-Louis Jourdol, the banks are ready, the other financial institutions are ready, we've got the savings. The idea is we need to just plug it all in for it to work and fund growth and activity. Jean-Louis Jourdol. So if you're the Prime Minister tomorrow, if you've got one or two decisions tomorrow, you have to make one or two decisions. Isn't there an investment, something to really to trigger so that the enormous savings in France can finance transition? Be Prime Minister, you need a majority to start with. Let me consider it's done, even more if there's no majority. Adding to that, it's a consensual measure. I think it's not a question of technical measures. I think the first need, we saw it in our country with the Gilets jaunes, television and so on. The first political need for the transition is to be a global discourse carried by the government explaining where we're going, how we're going there, and how the effort's going to be shared. It's not an effortless path. There's going to be a massive levy on savings, which can be refunded by taxes, or if you talk about taxes, you talk about equity. And like the third need of a prime minister, and God protect me from that load, so you need to have a number of discussions which take everyone on board with the feeling that everything is fair in it. Alain Pranois, 1 minute. A subject we haven't mentioned, it's a difficult one because I wanted to look into another territory. The carbon tax. Is it an essential point in the system which needs to be implemented so that the connections can take place between the savings needs and innovation? No, but you mustn't call it, yes, but you mustn't call it a tax. You need to change the pricing system. There's one system does it, which is well accepted, is bonus malus system, and this is under the WHO radars. Oh, sorry, the World Trade Organization radar. So, for instance, we look at air traveling. I talked about excellent results last year. 6% drop in greenhouse gases for France, plus 16% for airlines. So it allows me to say that with another economist, we have worked on a system which would be a system to exchange quotas of emissions at an individual level, 40 euros that you could spend on carbon quota on an air travel. And the cost of carbon would be what is estimated 100 euros a ton. And this would be a way to redistribute. Because all of us here, we take planes a lot. Others not represented here who travel very little by air. That's a message. It's a way of initiating energy transition by taking into account the concern for fairness which has been mentioned in the votes for after the last 2 weeks, instead of the repair bonus which is provided in France. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Delighted to see you at the Rencontre économique d'Aix. My name is Emmanuel Duté. I'm the director of Usine Nouvelle. We're here to talk about AI, reenchanting industries thanks to AI. So sometimes this is a tool that causes us to dream, maybe a bit too much. What are we talking about when we talk about AI, classic AI and generative AI? The first one is in companies and in industry for years now. The second is just taking baby steps. Does AI improve efficiency, performance, productivity of industry? And a very important point when we're going through a revolution like this, how can we bring the teams on board? I'll present the people who are with us to shed light on this. Beside me, we have Pierre Jacquet, then Eric Reenchanting, who's a professor at Stanford, Ming Gong Zong, Olivier Nolan for SAP France, Doris Bikorfer, who's the president of Siemens France, and beside me, Guillaume Ligier, who launched an application based on AI. It's called Explain, and he will explain that to us. So, as is the tradition, we'll start with the coordinator of the Cercle, who's been running between sessions. Pierre, please tell us what you think. So what we call artificial intelligence, and particularly generative AI, it's a generic technology. Its effectiveness, its efficiency improves constantly, and there are applications in all human activities, and it generates itself a constant flow of innovation thanks to its use. It's not surprising that we're seeing an increased use of generative AI, and that's been accompanied by a real debate. There are optimists, enthusiasts who are confident in its potential for economic and social progress, and then we have pessimists, prudent pessimists, who talk about all of the doubts and obstacles, and the object of our roundtable is to clarify this debate. We're lucky enough to have heads of companies around the table. We talk to talk about their concrete experience, their challenges, and also we have with us one of the most recognized professors on this topic, Eric, and his work is really essential at the heart of this topic, not necessarily to predict the future, but to understand what is going on currently. The idea is that the productivity gains through these generated innovations take place over several decades. For electricity, we talk about half a century. The historian of innovations, Paul Loup David, analyzed the impact of the dynamo, and we talked about the paradox of the solo, who observed that there are computers everywhere except in the productivity figures, and with the advent of a generic innovation, this can lead to a stagnation and even a slowdown in productivity. And one of the main reasons for this is that the impact of such innovations can only be perceived when there are deep changes in behavior, in management, in the organization of tasks, in the nature of jobs, and in the training of the agents. And this all takes time. Having said that, productivity gains, in my mind, raise two questions. The first, which is well illustrated by a recent book by Robert Gordon, The Rise and Fall of American Growth, published in 2016, and this concerns the nature of change, the quality of life that is created by innovation. So to be brief, Gordon observed that the visible progress of digital allows everyone to play on their mobile phones, and it can't bring the same social gains as electricity did. So he was criticizing the quality of the growth that is created by these innovations. And I think there's a real topic here. It shows that we have to be concerned by the quality of the innovations and by the contribution of innovations to the increase in our quality of life. And that is a debate that is worthy of us giving thought to it. When we talk about productivity, productivity is linked to the previous question, and that brings us to our value scale. How do we determine values? And do values have prices? Is the market a good vehicle, including the innovation market? Is it a good vehicle for social value? And this also leads me to the green economy, the way the metrics today, the way we measure productivity, does not necessarily correspond to the metrics that we should have to take into account the need for the green transition. Another important topic in our debate is artificial intelligence and employment. Should we be expecting a complete shift in the labor market to the massive destruction of jobs? Empirical studies that we have today show that this is not really what's happening. There's a recent article by Eric Brynjolfsson, I'm sorry, I'm massacring your name, that there are jobs and that we have to look at the productivity of these jobs in a certain number of fields, in particular the least qualified employees. And this is very interesting, but the question behind the employment, will artificial intelligence serve the productivity of the employees, or will we be substituting capital to labor? And I think, again, this is a very important point that we need to discuss. I'll conclude with the role of public policy and the notion of democracy. There is a series of questions that look at public policy. If we see that the economic and social benefits of artificial intelligence are not predetermined, that we have to guide them according to the social quality of the innovations, in that case we have to build them, and then we have to look at the role of the state. How do we create the incentives to push innovation in the right direction? In order to make these societal choices, there has to be a democratic debate, and this is one of the main challenges of artificial intelligence. Everything that is going on around social media, etc., this weakens democracy. It also makes it possible to control citizens through advertising in particular. So this is an important point in our discussions, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much for this brilliant introduction. We can applaud Pierre, and we'll move directly on to Eric Brynjolfsson. As Pierre said, you're one of the biggest specialists to work on artificial intelligence. Let's try to be as tangible as possible in this roundtable. Give us examples to tell us how artificial intelligence is used in different industries.
Thank you. Je ne parle pas français, so I'm going to speak English. My apologies for that. As was said, AI is one of, there's a lot of hype and noise about AI, but it's also one of the most transformative technologies of our era. You could compare it to electricity or the steam engine. These are what economists call general purpose technologies that affect not just one or two applications, but applications all across the economy. In my lab at the Stanford Digital Economy Lab and others, we've researched some specific applications. We've looked at call centers, we've looked at coding, we've looked at writing, sales, management consulting. In each of these, we saw significant productivity gains, and as Pierre mentioned, often it was the least skilled workers that benefited the most. So for instance, in the case of the call center, the customer service application, we looked at a company that had 5,000 call center workers, some of which had access to a general GPT, a large language model that would help them answer questions better, and some of them did not. And so we were able to get causal estimates of how much of a difference it made. What we found was that within about 4 to 5 months, the people who had access to the technology were on average about 14% more productive in terms of handling questions better, better responses, faster response time. We found that the least skilled workers had about a 35% improvement, and the most skilled workers very little. So there's a real gradient there. We also found that customer satisfaction went up significantly, and customer sentiment. If you looked at the words that were used, there were many more happy words and fewer angry words in the transcripts with the large language model. Finally, even the workers themselves seemed to be better off. We were worried that this would become kind of an electronic sweatshop, but instead what we found was that there was less turnover among the workers who had access to the technology. They also seemed to be happier. There were a few occasions where the technology failed, because as all big technology systems, sometimes it was unavailable for several hours. And what I was surprised to see was that the workers who had been using with the technology continued to perform better. So it wasn't that they had replaced their thinking, it had actually helped them learn faster how to answer customer questions. Now, this is a specific application, and we need to do more work to understand other cases like this, but more and more research is being done and finding that this technology can, in many cases, contrary to Bob Gordon and others, lead to significant productivity gains. And so I'm optimistic about what we'll be seeing in the coming decade.
Là, il y a beaucoup de choses de ce que vous dites autour de l'IA classique, si je peux le dire ainsi.
Around classic AI, we're worried, it's complicated to see what generative AI will bring as new accelerations. How do you see that? Everyone's in their proof of concept phase, and we haven't gone past that yet.
Well, many companies are in the proof of concept phase. I think we're still at the very early stage, maybe 1% or a few percent of the potential. Classical machine learning, if you can call it that, it's less than 10 years old, has been mostly used to make predictions to help people diagnose problems in human disease or machinery, or make other sorts of classifications. It can identify cancer better than human radiologists. And this predictive type of AI is opening up, I think, a goldmine of opportunities, and we are already seeing some big benefits there. The new AI that we're seeing in the past 2 years or so is generative AI, and hopefully everybody here has had a chance to work with Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude or some of the other large language models. If you haven't, you can do it for free and play with it a little bit, and you can see that it not only predicts or diagnoses things, it also will generate new kinds of content. So it can help you write your emails or even memos or songs or music. This is a different kind of AI than what we saw before. And even the top AI researchers that I work with at Stanford, MIT, around the world, have been surprised at how powerful it's been and able to solve a lot of questions. They honestly didn't expect it to work so well as it is working, and this is opening up some new possibilities. In particular, what we're finding is that if you simply make the models larger and larger, more computer power, more data, more parameters, there's a predictable improvement in the performance. These are called scaling laws. And one of the reasons the companies, the superscalers like Google and OpenAI, are spending so much money is they're finding that as they keep making them larger, the performance on medical exams, legal exams, writing memos is predictably improving. So we probably have at least about another 10x improvement ahead of us in the coming years as the next generation of GPT-5 and Gemini and Claude 4 come out.
On va continuer à essayer d'être comme ça.
So we'll continue to be as tangible as possible with the head of Huawei, Migang Zhang. So you're very up to date on AI. What is Huawei's vision on this question? Huawei, as a technology supplier, works on all technologies, and we focus on AI. 98% or more is used in the industrial domain right now. We've focused essentially on this vision, and we developed our generative AI platform based on a certain foundation, and then we diversified into different sectors, but always in the industrial domain. So what's important is that Huawei is both an actor in AI, but also a facilitator. A facilitator, because when we talk about AI, we can't forget the cloud and the capacity of storing in the cloud, the improvement in performance, and the volume capacity of the cloud. This is all very important. So we talk about 5G technology that makes it possible to have this AI, particularly in the industrial field, that is now everywhere. And we talk about AI, but we also talk about edge computing as a whole. So this is where Huawei acts as a facilitator in terms of AI technology. Olivier Nolan for SAP. We'll continue to go around the table. It's important to be tangible and to look at the ambitions of each of your companies, of people who work in industry. Most people have used SAP software. Where do you stand on AI? As we said, AI is not really new again. We've been working with it for 10 years now in its previous generation. What's interesting in generative AI is that we can automate a lot of repetitive tasks. So there are productivity gains that are very important that will be beneficial to our customers. To be very tangible, we are present in a lot of customers. We're the digital backbone of many companies across the world, and as such, we produce a lot of data. You have to remember that artificial intelligence without quality data is worthless or will produce false results and will not help the company. So we're lucky to be sitting on a wealth of data. We're investing and integrating solutions directly with this generative AI. We already have 50 or so processes that have been boosted. We'll have 100 or so by the end of the year. So we're really in the proof of concept phase, maybe a little bit further. The adoption of companies is clear, but what we're seeing is that we're just at the beginnings. We're learning every day. This generative AI is evolving quickly. And without getting too technical, behind generative AI, there are language models, different language models. So we are developing our own LLM. We work with others, and each brings in their specific characteristics and their ability to do things differently. We work with the company in terms of automation of configuration and code. We work with Microsoft on a concrete process in HR, which is a complicated one in companies. That's the creation of job sheets, job descriptions, also non-biased interview sheets. And this is with OpenAI that we do this. Another concrete case in the financial field is the invoice payment collection. So we have AI that will analyze the financial data in the system, all of the invoices that are late, and it will make it possible to determine the best strategy to collect on the payment. It will propose the best strategy to relaunch, to send a reminder to the customer, to draft a letter or an email to send the reminder to the companies. Yes, so those are very tangible cases. So Doris Birkhofer, you're the head of Siemens in France, and you work with SAP and AI. How do you, in your factories, because you have factories in France, how can you make AI as effective as possible? You said when we prepared this round table that above all, you have to know how to find the data. As Olivier said, SAP and Siemens are the two biggest software editors in Europe. We work together to propose joint solutions to our customers. We use SAP, and we work together on a usage case, thanks to AI, to do predictive accounting, to make it possible to anticipate the quality and level of the work. As you said, the core issue is the quality of the data. It's the gold in companies now, the new gold. And there's a comment that really struck me during Jensen Huang, who you talked about NBIGA. It's the third biggest global capitalization. During a Siemens conference with lots of heads of the group, he said,
of your company. C'est-à-dire, les data, c'est pas les sujets.
Data is not the topic of the IT department. It is the topic of the CEO. It's a strategic topic, and the CEOs really have to be interested in it. Since we're talking about industry, just to give you, it's important what you're saying. Are you testing all the software that you give to your teams? Have you been trained to use AI? That's a good question. The role of the CEO is to ensure that there's a real data strategy so that it's structured, that we have the right tools for the teams, and that the teams are using the tools. It's so complex that I'm not an expert in data, but my role is to ensure that companies use it in the right way. We talked about data in industry. Just to give you a figure, a modern factory today that's highly automated generates each month 2,000 terabytes of data, 500,000 films. On Netflix, you find 20,000 movies or films. It's huge. All this data exists, but we have to do something with it. In most companies, the data is on paper in Excel files, in databases. So our role as a company like Siemens, our raison d'etre is to combine the real world. We've been doing this for 175 worlds, and to combine it with the digital world in order to identify usage cases throughout the value chain in order to help accelerate, optimize, and deal with the big stakes of the time that are complex. We've been doing it, but in future we're going to do it better and faster. Guillaume Léger, you founded Explain. Maybe everyone doesn't know Explain, so can you tell us in just a few words? Thank you. Emmanuel, I'm happy to be here this morning. This is a fascinating period because today we're starting to stand back and be able to look at AI, see what works now, what will work in the future. Explain is an AI company, and our role is to re-enchant public procurement. I'm not sure if you have already answered public calls for tenders. So, yes, it's always really fun. So we're going to make it more enchanting. So it's a huge proposal. Public procurement represents 12% of global GDP. So transforming this is means a significant increase in productivity. And public procurement processes are fastidious. So before I explain, I had to read the specifications of calls for tenders every day. So at Expert, we're a technology company, AI company, that will automate all of the tasks that we can in these processes to respond to calls for tenders. And now, over time, we see that there are tangible applications that work with AI. There's medicine, also in the legal field, as well as in public procurement. This is a usage case that today can be transformed thanks to generative AI. A good part of the CAC 40 companies are your customers. It's fastidious to send in bids for tenders. And now companies can answer all of them thanks to AI, the work that Explain is doing. There are big groups that are our customers, but the challenge is really to be able to propose to any company to be able to position themselves in a tender. More companies respond, the better the offer will be, and the better will be the public services rendered. So the challenge is not only to draft, but it's also to properly select the public procurement contract. I'm going to be a little bit technical here. So it's a company consultation dossier. It's several thousand pages. If you do it once a year, it's fine, but if you do it several times per week, you need to be enchanted, you need help. Yes. Eric, I'm going to come back to you. How do you see artificial intelligence remodeling the economic landscape in terms of productivity, in terms of growth? Can you tell us, can you give us some specific examples where AI has considerably improved the efficiency? As Pierre said earlier, what's really important is to see productivity gains, what it can provide.
Yes, I agree. Productivity is ultimately what we're hoping for. That is getting more output with less input. It doesn't mean working harder. It means having more resources to address what's happening in the environment, healthcare, poverty. And I believe that this is the big opportunity for the coming decade for us to substantially improve productivity, at least a doubling of productivity growth rates in the United States to about 3% from 1.5%, or maybe more ambitiously, a doubling of the levels to have us be about twice as wealthy by the end of the decade, the more extreme cases. Now, we heard lots of very specific examples here, and I think all of you who are in businesses or in government have heard many, many examples of particular places where AI might help. You've also heard, hopefully, understand that there's also a lot of hype, and you've got to be careful that there's a lot of nonsense out there. And so what we're trying to do is have a more data-driven approach to assessing all of these. About 5 years ago, I wrote a paper with Tom Mitchell, head of machine learning at Carnegie Mellon, about what can machine learning do, where we systematically analyzed 18,000 individual tasks. we pioneered what we call the task-based approach. Instead of looking at whole companies or occupations, we break it down into very fine-grained tasks. And then each of these tasks we assess, and we found a pattern for which ones machine learning could help. And then just 2 weeks ago, one of my students, Daniel Rock, working with a team from OpenAI, had a paper come out in Science which applied the same methodology for generative AI and also looked at those 18,000 tasks and found that about 40%, about 2/5 of the tasks in the US economy could in principle be done better, at least twice as efficiently with generative AI. And I think it would be similar in France and other countries. But this taxonomy, this task-based approach where it goes through them, can now be applied to individual companies. Daniel Rock and I, along with Andy McAfee and others, have started a company called WorkHelix, where we've put this technology into software. And what WorkHelix will do is we'll scan all of the tasks in any given company, larger companies, smaller companies, and identify which ones are most likely to be applicable. What we're hoping is we can compress, as Pierre mentioned, it often takes 10 years or more for the full benefits of a powerful new technology like electricity. We think that can become much faster, just a few years, if companies have a data-driven approach to assessing all of these tasks. But it can't be done with anecdotes and examples from vendors. It can't be done at a very high level of looking at a whole company. You have to go very fine-grained to these individual tasks and have a data-driven approach to doing it. And that's what WorkHelix is doing.
Vraiment, c'est passionnant. Mingang Zhang, on va poursuivre avec vous. Doris nous disait il y a un instant à quel point c'est important.
We're going to continue.
You were saying how important it is to be able to manage the data, recover it. So you've also internally developed your own. So Ongu, I think, it means that it's possible to manage the data in a secure way. Yes, Ongu, this is the model that we have developed. And there are two levels. First level is the basic, the base that we use, and then we have a strategy we call per sector. Our vision is 98% to replace industrial use and so on. And at the moment we have developed about a good 10 sectors where you have manufacturing, we've got port management, cities, R&D, medication, and everything which is concerns weather forecasts and so on. So I'd like to give a concrete example. For a group on working on spare parts, for instance, made of aluminium and alloys. It's a major group with about 10 plants located in China. They started a production, and in 2019, when 5G came along, they got in touch with us to see what we could do together. So we really transformed this with the whole of the ecosystem. Because here we're talking about artificial intelligence, but in the industrial world and everything in the ecosystem concerning the different terminals. And the result, imagine a large workshop, big as a football ground, closed, of course, about 40 degrees inside, large, very high humidity rate. There are a lot of machines doing the molding, so on. Last year I visited it, really impressive inside. I met about 20 people for such large manufacturing unit. And the results they got, there's no one managing the machines anymore. The machines have, and artificial intelligence with 5G managed all this, and the result is that they increased the use of these machines by more than 30%. And more than 15, increased by more than 15% the number of parts. The positive impact between 10 to 20% in the manufacturing costs. That is very concrete. And something else, I won't go into detail, for instance, but you have, for instance, weather forecasts. We can really get forecasts for 10 days in less than 10 seconds. With the existing systems, it used to take 5 hours. That is thanks to the power of AI. And so, thanks to now we have weather forecasts, open data has been able to put into the base over the last 43 years to be able to use as a basis for this AI. Sees is how AI can really improve the efficiency of traditional manufacturing and also change the economy in a way. Let me come back to a figure. I don't think it was mentioned before. Madame Stolley's study said that the wealth provided by artificial intelligence was 2,500 to 4,000 billion dollars. It's tremendous. It's the GDP of Germany. The vision around generative AI is there's a lot of fantasy around AI. We'll have a vision in or increasing or augmenting the employees and provide a kind of superpowers. It's a super personal assistant in another way. Because well, you're right. It is a good example. We talk a lot about AI. We talk about co-pilots coming in for solutions. As a co-pilot of SAP has one, and for all those who work with SAP in the past, it's a revolution because we've got to talk with the software system in a natural language, ask questions, becomes an assistant, but also an analyst to provide data in a more macro way regarding our questions. Reenchant industry, we saw there's been an increase in productivity. It will allow countries like those in Europe to gain productivity in their geographical areas, and also means you can concentrate on what will create extra value. Most standard tasks will be left for a generative AI, and we will insist on the added value, which really is important for the business. Something also which is very important is innovation. Generative AI can speed up innovation cycles. We'll go faster. We can be quicker in the way of operating on a daily basis. We'll be testing more things because it's faster. Tests don't take so long, and then we will pick on what's best. Yes, we will be faster. We also talk about the calculation power. Why can we do it today? Because we have a calculation power which is absolutely crazy compared to what we had before. So simulation can be very quicker. Companies can adapt much more quickly. We have a perma-crisis now, and companies are suffering from their capacity not to be able to adapt as quickly as possible, and this can be done with generative AI. We had the example of the COVID vaccines. These were created thanks to AI. We was able to act quickly thanks to that. Last point I wanted to mention, and particularly for Europe, we have shortages of labor in some sectors. We also have some jobs because the repetitive tasks are not attractive. AI means the capacity to make jobs more attractive. We can automate jobs and then move towards more added value jobs. So concrete. So Doris, see how you use generative AI. Some bosses, for instance, say that you can break down the barrier language because everyone can work in their own language. And if someone from China and Brazil has the answer, you get the answer in your own language. So how does it work for you? What we have done, we have practically about 2,000 people outside the company, all worlds. They're in contact with the customers. We analyze the value chain of an industrial plant. What is it? First of all, design, ideas, prototypes. Then you've got resource planning, material, engineering. You see, how is the production process going to be covered? And then you have the operations, production itself, and then maintenance after sales. To give you a concrete example, with Microsoft, we have an industrial co-pilot, and for engineers who program the automatons, the brains say they define the rate, they decide how the robotic arms should work. They need to know language of these automatons, and then can exchange with the machine in their natural language. The machine will help them correct any faults and will speed up the process. It is real support for engineers. Another example, outside the actual company, but very closely linked, is the management of electrical networks. You know, the electrification is going to increases, thanks to electromobility and so on. And you have electrical network managers who have to correct any anomalies and follow things very closely. Here we have a solution as well. Thanks to AI, the network manager has help in finding any blackouts or any congestion and programming maintenance operations. It's a very concrete example where you have support to engineers and operators. And it's also a way of democratizing, because the skill level of people can be lower because there is the support of AI, but it doesn't report human beings in our plants and infrastructures. You use private AI adapted to Siemens, and L'Oréal, for instance, have their own AI, so does Veolia. We have our VLM platform for developing products. We do work internally. We look what's on the market. We use a co-pilot which from Microsoft, which reacts. We combine because then you have a question of securing your own data. So this is the customer data, and then the customers decide whether they want to open up their data to other players. It's not public data, it's just specific to the business. As I said, you have to make sure you structure the data right, so you know where they are available in the company. Let me continue with you. You are a French company. This question to the question of technology. What did you use as a basis? And it's important to be sovereign regarding the issue of AI, if you can be so in France and Europe. So to come back to what we've just heard, a year and a half we had ChatGPT. GDP came out, saying the world's going to change and everything, without it being very specific. Here you have concrete examples of working AI, and it's specialized AI, vertical today. What works is works on specific cases. Go down into detail to understand what tasks can be automated, what can't, and will provide the language particularly for these cases. That's why we created Explain. The fact that we are hearing this shows that we're getting out of hype and we're really getting concrete to what AI can change. And to get to the end, I won't talk so much about sovereignty, but ecosystem. I think what is essential is to be able to develop an ecosystem. We have a good position in France to do that. When I talk ecosystem, I'm not about tens of millions of dollars, massively injected. Money is important, but it's not everything. When you look at the most highest performance ecosystem in the world, Silicon Valley. Why Silicon Valley? Because a startup in Silicon Valley will first find customers in the Silicon Valley. They have an initial customer base which will allow them to go and conquer the world. That is an ecosystem. It's something we're seeing in France. We have partners, for instance, of Mistral, We use the LLM of Mistral to include it in Explain. We give money to Mistral, then we sell our solution to a lot of companies, major groups in particular. I think that major groups in French and Europe can really play a role so that companies born in France can use their worldwide footprint to develop. Because when today you create a startup in AI, the ambition is clear. The idea is not to stay in France, it's to become a world leader. And in France, we're not doing badly in public markets, but we could teach others a lot. So you're conquering the world. Well, we're starting with France. I come from Alsace, so I start with Alsace first, France, and then the world. And I think that beyond sovereignty, I think the notion of ecosystem, a strong ecosystem, is important. That means funding, research, training. We have it. Then you have to find customers. We've got them, and hopefully we'll have more and more. On the question of sovereignty, it's really important. And do you think that, with your global point of view, that Europe still has a place between the United States and China, which, of course, is not lagging behind?
Absolutely no. Europe has a tremendous opportunity. We hear here on the stage some of the people who are driving AI in Europe, and I'd like to see a lot more of that. But there is a perception that Europe isn't doing as much as it could. I heard one pundit quip that America innovates, China replicates, and Europe regulates. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I think it doesn't have to be that way. Certainly we see a lot of innovation coming out of China. My friend Kai-Fu Lee has a wonderful book called AI Superpowers, describing the ecosystem in China that's inventing so many amazing technologies. Obviously at Silicon Valley we see that. But Europe, I think, is not doing as much as it could. There are so many smart people here, some of them on the stage, but also my friends like Jan LeCun, who invented many of the core technologies that are being used. And when I talk to him, he's very passionate about pushing the frontier further and spends time here. I see Jean Tirole and Philippe Aguillon here and so many other intellectuals who are understanding more how the economics of technology can be improved. And there are some tech companies like Mistral that are very much on the frontier of developing these large language models. When I was meeting with Bruno Le Maire last month, the Minister of Economy here in France, he was very passionate about unlocking some of the brain power that's in this room and that's around France to contribute more on the innovation side as well as on the replication and regulation side. I'm optimistic that we will see that more. I think there's a change happening in Europe that is unlocking some of that potential, more entrepreneurship, more freedom to innovate. And that will be very good for the world. It'll be good for America. It'll be good for China if Europe and France in particular starts unlocking some of those capabilities of the entrepreneurs and the bigger companies.
C'est intéressant ce que vous dites sur la souveraineté.
What you're saying about sovereignty and freedom is interesting. How can we try, maybe we haven't talked about it enough for the time being, how can we try and guarantee a responsible use in maybe a fair and
This is incredibly
way?
I think that the technology is able to unleash a lot of productivity and some specific applications economy-wide, but it also has some real, genuine dangers. The technology can create bias, privacy innovations. There are deep fakes that can control the narrative in social media to the point where we're losing free will because it controls what we hear, what we understand. I think where people are working on super intelligent systems, but we're already beginning to have super persuasive systems that can control what we think and believe. And that's a little bit of a scary possibility. There are also real dangers when it comes to employment and disruption. I don't think we're seeing it yet, but it's not hard to imagine that as we get those 40% of tasks being augmented by AI, there's going to be tremendous economic disruption. And last but not least, I do think there are some real catastrophic risks. These technologies can be used to create new kinds of viruses or other weapons or cyber weapons that we couldn't even imagine before. So it's important to have some regulation and have some controls on those dangers. And if it's done right, I think that actually can speed the positive development. People often think of this as one dimension. Either you have more innovation or more regulation. Actually, you can have more of both. The right kind of regulation will speed the adoption of the technology. Let me give you a specific example. In the United States, I'm working with the people in Congress to understand better what are the rights of the content creators, the people who create new art, new music, new writing, versus the large language models that are using this and ingesting it. And how do you balance those rights? Right now, there's a lot of hesitation in adopting large language models in big companies because they don't understand the property rights of who's going to have to be paid. If we can have more clarity on that and more interoperability so that we have clear rules of the road, I think it will actually speed up the adoption, because having that kind of a framework that defines property rights is one of the basic needs for a well-functioning economic free market. So having the clarity around this and having people in government who understand the technology well enough to write intelligent regulations can simultaneously reduce some of those dangers, but also speed up the beneficial applications of artificial intelligence.
Mingang, sur la question justement de la souveraineté.
On the question of sovereignty, I don't want to offend you, why it tends to be sometimes criticized by the Americans. How can you reassure with AI on the issue? Before answering this, let me pick up on what Eric has just said. I believe that today, I say it is time, and it is really important. We are changing our viewpoint, innovation, replication, and now we have to see an improvement everywhere. We have to see how, if we talk about innovation in the West, in the United States, and regulation in Europe, I think we have to change this vision of things. When you asked about sovereignty, and I will answer it in a minute. So it's important. It's important to clarify these points. Otherwise, if I say to you, in terms of technology, when we talk about sovereignty, for AI, for instance, the common basis that we use open data. There is no training with customer data, for instance. You believe me or not? For instance, well, you're not going to lie to us. When we say we don't use customer data. That is a starting point that you need to explain. Otherwise, it's no good to explain. With 5G, what is 5G? 5G, we've all checked it, tested, examined it closely in France and elsewhere. This information provided by Huawei, and it's going to be available in France in 2 years' time. If we talk about sovereignty, we're not collecting any data. There is no network built by Huawei where we have access to data. Once we deliver it, we just give a key, and if you don't have a problem, you don't need to call upon Huawei, so it's no problem. So more concretely regarding 5G, everything is checked and verified on the cloud. It is important to support AI. The cloud, about a month ago, the Huawei cloud was checking the conformity with ChatGPT. Sorry, in 2015, 2016 came into force. So we made sure that we were compliant with all the regulations with Huawei. So sovereignty is an important subject. And what is your vision? Olivier. A couple of points concerning the question of responsibility. I think technology groups have a strong responsibility in AI provided to our customers. For instance, very early on, we had an ethics committee to make sure that we had the right responsibility level towards our customers. The second concern regulation and innovation. I think our position is that, of course, in Europe, we need to have a regulatory framework which protects the citizens and businesses, protects the data. That is essential. But this regulation must not slow down innovation. And today, I think it was a good summary. We tend to have too much regulation. We have an excellent opportunity today. We have the capacity in Europe, thanks to this fifth industrial revolution, to catch up our delay in the field of technology. Everyone's doing the same thing at the same time. Which we just, well, I think we'll have the capacity to come up to the right level, and I think we can even surge ahead. The cards have been dealt again. It's a major innovation. We're changing paradigms, so we have this capacity. You can see we're able to bring champions like Mistral in France. In Germany, we have others. But there's also we need to have massive investment plans, because a lot of investment necessary, not only on the public side. There are alliances between technology groups like Siemens, SAP, and industrial groups who need to ally to encourage this. Soon need to close. I'd like your opinion, though, Doris, because we mentioned it several times. But how do you get the teams on board? You say it might be an extra support, but how can you train the teams without getting into politics? Is certainly one of the major concerns. Say that maybe a machine will be more important, do a better job than to do a better job. How do you deal with that? Another reassuring message for Europe. We are maybe behind, but in industry, the world leaders in automation and digitization are European companies, Siemens, Schneider, ABB. And for AI, you need to know the real world. We need to use the strengths that we have and go on developing and speeding up the use of AI by combining with automation. We mustn't lose this advance. We also need innovation. It's a kind of double revolution, both in technology and human level, so that people are not afraid, because people are afraid. People are always afraid of what they don't know. You need to make AI known. So information is essential. At Siemens, we have a digital learning platform, and all the employees, right from the operator CEO, need to do a number of digital teaching hours. In our summer university for employees, it's based on AI. It's basics for everyone up to a higher level, so that everyone becomes familiar with AI. Then the third element is to involve the employees when the uses which are made. So after the summer, we're going to have a major workshop to see how AI can be productive and how they can improve the quality of work, well-being of employees. There's always a dual challenge when we talk about productivity and competitiveness, but not forgetting the employees themselves. Other word, what you were saying, you said you're going to conquer the world without generative AI. Would you be limited to conquering Alsace-Lorraine? Alsace first, because Lorraine comes later. Yes, absolutely. So the generative AI translation solutions have been entirely solved. we're talking about training employees, but I think you also must educate the general public. Everyone is concerned by AI today, whether they know it or not, whether they want to. Everyone uses AI today. AI is not magic. Mathematical and statistical models which practice on large databases with high calculation speed. If you want people to start using it, they need to know how it works. Then if you talk about the ecological impact, the calculation power, we can add more calculation power. If we look over the 5 last years, but we need water and electricity. What is the impact? Google has said that the emissions of CO2 have gone up by 48% over the last 5 years because of the calculation speed. When you think about AI, about hundreds of millions of users professionally, you have to think of systems with a limited use of electricity. So it's something we need to think about it. So, Pierre, you have a minute to conclude. Well, thank you. In a minute, 5 ideas from this discussion. What is happening is amazing. It's really a source of optimism and something we need in a rather morose environment I don't need to discuss. And then there is a great increase in the production of employees possible, which have to be carefully. It's going to take time. It requires training, equipment, but the potential is tremendous. Third, the key is data, as was said several times. And the use of data doesn't go without a value system, and we didn't talk much about it, but I think it brings us back to democracy, choice of values. And this is more important because we're at a key point in the French debate. And must pay attention to democracy. That's a message. Then AI, there's also a link with knowledge. Here, I say, as a professor, now we have access to a lot of information. What creates knowledge on values? How can we use AI to teach? And I think this is absolutely essential. Last point. Benefit will be there. We've got 4,000 billion, but I think it's underestimated. I think it will be far, far more than that. But there are 3 questions here. What speed, what cost, and what scale? It depends on the ecosystem that we manage to build with training, participation, research, and regulation. And we hope that the regulators will know what they're doing. Certainly a lot of roundtables around AI next in the future. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.